Hello, everybody, and welcome back to your second episode of the week of Church is Stupid.
Comma butt.
I'm Andy.
I'm Ruth.
I'm Elijah.
And we started a conversation earlier this week about hypocrisy and like what that means. And we looked at it a lot from the inside-in perspective, like what it means for somebody inside the church to look at something that's also inside the church. But I think it's also very important for us to look at this from, the intended point of view of this podcast almost, from that outside-in perspective.
It felt like a dig, but it's fine. It's fine, Andy.
It was supposed to be like a compliment because, it's not often that we look at. I think we're supposed to look at it more. It's not often that we do look at, though.
Yeah.
That person who comes to church, for the first time, period, sits in the pew and gets called out for it. Mm-hmm. That person, we started off episode 1 talking about that whole thing. And I think that, there are a lot of different hypocrisies that person sees when they walk in the door for the first time.
Sure, go ahead. Oh, I was going to say elaborate, but I did
my
all the other words
my
first.
very first one
Go
is
ahead. Be hypocritical.
Do it.
All right, I'll just go ahead and contradict myself.
Yeah.
The outside person doesn't matter.
Wow. That's
Okay.
going to be the only quote someone picks up from this entire... Somehow that'll be what we're known
Please
for.
don't leave yet.
That's the only thing we're going to be known for the rest of forever.
Well, I'll be known. Okay. But walking in the door for the first time, what's the first thing that you see? Think about
You want
this
a literal
church,
answer?
Think about literal answers.
I mean, I don't know about this church because I haven't really been in an in-person service yet.
Yeah, no, I mean, COVID has not been friendly for all that.
If a lot of people walk into a church, the first thing they see might be the foyer, maybe like the sign-in book that a lot of churches will have like on a pedestal, like right in front of the entrance.
Mm-hmm.
And then sanctuary, a bunch of other pews and the stage up front. I don't know. There's your answer. That's what I can think of.
I mean that's pretty fair. I think all the churches that that I look at, there is supposed to be, you walk in the door and there's this gathering area of such.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or I'm in that foyer area. That's
Yeah.
exactly what I'm thinking about. And so you see people talking and all this kind of a thing. And so what are you supposed to as a member of the church? You see a new person who comes, you walk up and you greet them. That'd be the normal thing that
Probably
would
ideally, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But we don't see that happen all the time. And I'm literally, I'm talking my example is coming from the worst church possible kind of thing. I'm not saying your church is guilty of this. I'm also saying take a look at it from an outside perspective at some point.
Sure, yeah.
But you have either greeters or you have people that say hi, hello, all that kind of thing. But this was brought to my attention this last week at our own church here. And I know we often do a great job of greeting and saying hi to people. Mm-hmm. During one of our services, we had a family who wasn't greeted. Nobody had said hi to them. And the first person that said hi to them was after the service. Which was just to me a little weird because I sit in the back there. And so I don't often talk with people. And because of COVID and everything, I'm very bad at talking with people. I'm also terrible at socializing. But we have some people who are just astounding at that. And so if you actually go through a service and you don't get said hi to here or greeted in some way, that's kind of weird to me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But in other places, that's normal. And this is supposed to be just that welcoming space.
Sure.
I'm looking at that term of welcoming in new people.
Mm-hmm.
And we fail at that. There's a lot of things that we're called to do that we fail at. And that was just one of the examples that I'm looking at.
Okay, so how would this example pertain necessarily to the church being perceived as or actually being hypocritical?
Well, maybe it doesn't apply as much here at this church because I don't think we praise ourselves as much on being that welcome voice.
But in your idea of a church where someone attends and isn't really said hi to or necessarily welcomed at the beginning, goes through a service without anyone going out of the way to socialize with them because it's their first time.
I think it's very hypocritical in some churches because they claim that they are that welcoming space, that they like greet everybody that they talk to and like all this kind of stuff. And like they'll talk to the same people that they talk to week after week.
Yeah.
Which
I can see that, yeah.
I guess it's more like where my hypocrisy is coming from. It may just be like a small thing.
Sure.
That may not make fully sense.
I do get where you're coming from. I'm trying to just dissect it a little bit more too. But and I'm also fully acknowledging that we're talking about, and that we're talking about trying to maybe acknowledge some of the, like you said, like outside looking in at a church. And I am trying to dissect it as someone who's, for all intents and purposes, sort of inside the church.
Yeah.
But I can see where you're coming from, though, where if someone is, because I know there are people who attend church services who are like trying out a new service because they're like, they're looking for a place maybe like they're not because they've been a part of it, for a while, but because they're looking for maybe like a new community or something, who I can see then, how it could be viewed as pretty hypocritical, especially if the church, like you said, maybe like says or prides itself on being like a welcome, open community, anyone's sort of welcome, which a lot of churches do try to say.
And I know that for that part in particular comes from like a specific example I've talked about before.
Yeah.
Where my dad has taken over that role of being the greeter of everybody new, and that nobody else had greeted anybody who was new during that service, and it was they had prided themselves on being extremely social and everything, and they got good marks because my dad was the one who said hi to everybody. But it's a whole nother everything conversation.
Well, and I'm sort of sitting here thinking, from the outside looking in, I'm not even sure I'd walk into a church. Because if I'm really looking outside, where I find most of my information about the church would be from news articles, from seeing friends, or like knowing people, because I think a lot of people know somebody who's a Christian at the very least. Maybe not everyone by any means over here in the West, but I would say it's pretty common for you to at least know some. So most of your information is either coming from personal experience with a Christian or from news outlets, right? And I would say a large portion, particularly within the last probably year and a half or so, of the publicity that churches have gotten has not been good publicity and has been stuff that does appear very hypocritical in a sense. And I don't think it just started within the last year and a half by any means. I think it's been going on for a while. But if you're really looking at that, I mean, what do we do about that? How do we address that as a church? I think a lot of times people blow it off like it's the one, it's that church. Yeah, everybody knows that's not what all Christians are like. But I think that's a mistake on our part. I don't think that people know that not all Christians are like that.
I don't think that Christians even really truly know that they're not all like that. Like, I think it's easy just to say that as a blanket answer, when the reality is I think that there are a lot of churches who do, quote things like that more than other Christians will even want to admit.
Well, and how do we fight against that? How do we continue? I mean, honestly, it's something I think that we don't address a lot as churches, because one of the things that really, really irked me when I was coming up in ministry and in school was hearing people complain about the way that churches are perceived. And they're like, we don't deserve this bad rap, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I finally just looked at them and was like, does it, at the end of the day, does it matter whether or not their perception is right if that's their perception? If we're supposed to share the gospel with them, I mean, it matters in other sense.
It does matter if it is right. Yeah.
It matters in the sense of like ethically whether churches need to change and things like that. But I mean, if a whole group of people thinks church is unwelcoming and stuff, and we just say, no, we're welcoming.
Are you going to ostracize that entire group of people who thinks that
And
because
just-
you think they're wrong?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's my
Okay.
point.
Yeah.
It definitely matters on many scales
Yeah.
whether or not that
Yeah.
is actually whether their perception is correct.
But if you're going to talk about
But
those
if-
people and their importance and their
Yes.
viewpoints being important or not being irrelevant, right? Like,
Yes, if you're just going to write off their perspective,
Yeah.
the reality is that we're called to reach other people and share the gospel with all people. So when we write off voices and we just say, well, they're just not giving us a chance, that's not right. To me, that's incredibly wrong, and that's incredibly hypocritical in its own sense, because you're unwilling to look at the perspectives of other people. And so I think even if you took it away, even if the churches were actually 100% perfect,
Imagine a world.
in a world,
Best
But-
of luck getting there.
Right.
but even then, if everybody outside of these walls, or even most people outside of these walls, thought we were awful, it's still our job to address that. Even if we are perfect, it's our job to address that with how do we handle those topics, because it's not as easy as just looking at them and saying, well, you're wrong, we're perfect.
Well, yeah. What exactly do you mean by addressing that, though? Because some people could, quote, address that by making public statements about how stupid all those people are that they would think that they're that bad, and other people would address it by, trying to maybe get the word out or clear their name or something. Like, what do you mean when you say it's important to address it?
Well, I honestly think it looks different in a lot of different places, because it depends on what's the issue at hand, right? So addressing it, if you dismiss it, that's a bad addressing. You're right. There's bad ways to address things.
Yeah.
But if you're willing to go in and hear and listen and then actively try to bridge the gap, essentially,
Yeah.
like we had talked about with community outreach, and with the pastor who asked the town, what can we be doing? And then they realized the whole time they weren't shoveling snow in part of the sidewalk. And so that was doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
Where we actually are willing to start to look at why do they believe these things about the church? Why do you think the church is hypocritical?
Yeah.
And letting them talk without just shutting it down instantly,
Yeah.
without coming up with a million excuses. One of my dream projects, which I know is a huge dream that will probably never be realized, but that's okay, is to have just a wall, a blank wall put up, and asking people to come by and just graffiti a word on it of how church has made them feel. I know, you're making a face.
You're going to get a lot of phallic objects on that. I'm just saying.
I know, okay. But,
In
that's
a
why
world where
I
where
know.
people don't graffiti.
I understand why it doesn't work from a practical perspective. But if we could just I think if churches could just put up a space, like a public space, and say, what is it? How do you see the church? And then see what people write. You're going to get a lot of terrible things up there. Quite honestly, you're going to get swear words. You're going to get probably phallic objects. Thank you for that, Andy. But you're going to get, if people come at it with good faith and are willing to actually express their feelings, I think the church would be very surprised by what people think of it.
Yeah.
And if you even just doing this and then afterwards holding some kind of service or some kind of thing where you don't sit there and say, we're not these things, but you say, I am sorry for the times the church has been these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am sorry for the ways that we have harmed you. I am sorry, and we want to start bridging that gap. So how can we do that?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
To me, I know that, again, I know all of the reasons why that doesn't work. Thank you, Andy. But in some level, finding somewhere to start, finding some way to communicate and to realize that it's not just some exception. It's not just that church.
Yeah.
Do you want me to? You want to go?
You can go.
Okay. Um,
I have made the executive decision that you
Okay.
can talk in.
Thanks. Just one of the things that you said of the church not knowing what they're doing wrong.
I don't think that's true in every case.
I don't think that's true in most cases. This is my issue. I think the church sometimes refuses to acknowledge that they know what they're doing wrong.
So, I don't disagree with you, because we are all sort of like, you know, in a church, and when we talk about sort of keeping the church accountable, I think a lot of us talk. I don't know. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it's safe to assume that most of the time that we're kind of talking about that sort of subject, that we're sort of referring to our peers and like leadership, because I think we're maybe you guys more than me, but like even me being on this, we're sort of part of the church right now. But I think a lot of people outside of people who don't attend church, people who yeah, I don't know, Christian or not, people who don't attend church, who are looking at how the church is treating them or maybe treating their community, I don't think for them it's all just about leadership. It's about like anyone, like even other people who just attend, sort of a thing. And I think that it's easy for us, and probably rightfully so, to assume and actually think that, you know, a lot of churches really are aware of the wrong things that they might be doing. But I think a lot of times we're not necessarily thinking of the congregation in that aspect, whereas I think a lot of other people maybe outside are. And I think if you try to look at it from that perspective, sometimes I think there might be a lot of examples where a lot of the congregation might not really be aware of certain things that like the leadership in the church are really doing. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Not to derail your entire point.
No,
I'm
glad to build off that point, because
yeah.
I'm not meaning just the leadership knows what they're doing.
Yeah. Okay.
I think a majority of the time, if you have a problem member in the congregation or the group of them, or however you want to say it, everybody knows that who's a part of the church. And I'm not saying but
maybe not universally, but like
not like universally.
You think it happens a lot,
but like as somebody who's been a member of a congregation and not technically a member of the church or a member of like the staff or anything like that, I have been in a congregation, and it's more obvious than you think to pick out the people who like, and actually that could just be because like I've grown up and all that, but you can almost tell the like older lady who's going to fight over her pew. You can tell the younger kids who are going to cause a disturbance during church, like all that kind of there's certain aspects that like you can go into a church service, and I guess again might just be me because of the amount of time like I've actually spent in church and like a part of different congregations, but I can most of the time tell where the problems are at, and I want to like
fair enough. Yeah.
Even like if I'm not a permanent member of the church, like I can like look there and say that. So I think that a normal congregation member can look there and say that. And so if the normal congregation member says that and like acknowledges that, somebody eventually through gossip, because the church does gossip, and we've talked about this before.
What?
It reaches the higher ups.
Yeah.
And they don't do anything about it because that's a member of the church or for another reason or another reason. And so they kind of acknowledge and like accept those who are on the inside more than they do the people who are on the out.
Yeah.
And so
we can't argue with you there.
The person coming to church for the first time that sits in the wrong pew or something, and has to deal with the older lady who yells at people for sitting in their pew. Like they don't get any real assistance unless the person who's sitting behind them like leans over and whispers to them, "Hey, you're going to want to move for X reason." Or sometimes doesn't even give a reason. And like we kind of try and hide like some of our own problems from ourselves instead of trying to fix them. And I think that was kind of more what my point was.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I'd expound on that to try and make it make sense.
Well, and I think you're highlighting a few different things.
Probably.
Like, no, you're fine. But I think it's sort of excuses are made a lot of times.
Very much so.
Like, for instance, in situations with pews, oh, well, that's just how this person is.
Yeah.
Or, well, they're they're a great giver. So we can't. That has happened
Yeah.
in more than one
for
meeting
sure.
that I have sat through.
Yeah, it might sound like a funny worst case scenario, like Pawnee style church, but it's more of a reality.
Parks and Recs reference.
I mean, you know exactly what I mean when I say it, right?
I do.
Yeah.
You said Parks and Rec, but the Office theme started playing through my head for some reason. Anyhow,
But yeah, it's more based on reality than you may think.
but I think there are oftentimes it's easier to, especially for churches, for people in general, it's easier to make excuses than it is to do the hard work to try to say, okay, what's the reason behind this? And you might find out that the person yelling for their pew is actually a really wonderful person who like lost her husband, and that's the place that they sat together, and so it brings up a lot of emotions, and you can help them deal with that and say, okay, yeah, but you're misplacing your emotions into this. Do you see how it's actually harmful over here? Not that everyone always has good intentions, but I want to believe, as a pastor, I want to believe in most cases they do.
And that's hypocritical.
But
Nature, nurture, good, evil. There's this whole conversation to be had about that.
True. But I think it's easier though to not, and especially as somebody who again has been in church leadership for a little while now, that sometimes you just don't have the energy to deal with every problem all at once. Which isn't to give, I mean, I guess it is to give an excuse. Quite
very much so.
Quite frankly. But again, it's exhausting. There needs to be, you have to develop an entire, and I hate to say it like this because I sound so churchy, but it's also true. I am churchy, so I guess I own it. You have to develop a culture of accountability, acceptance, and growth-driven nature within churches. And that was not something that was always a priority. And not every church has made that a priority. And so therefore, you walk into it and you're paddling upriver. And if you're weak like me, it doesn't go so well. Yeah. I have a bad shoulder. So
how did we get in a canoe?
It happens. But I think that's the problem, at least that I've seen, is that we've kind of ended up here, and now we're fighting uphill battles consistently to try to people with very, very good intentions are trying to develop cultures where no, part of the Christian journey is growth, is change, is learning how to be more Christ-like, and doing the hard work that comes with that, which is acknowledging one's own hypocrisies, acknowledging all of that, and moving forward so we can be more welcoming and open, and a place where people don't look at us like we're constantly hypocrites, rightfully so. But how do we get there is the hard part. Yeah. How do you develop this culture within a church?
How do you even start, right?
Yeah, where do you even start? Like, is it a ground up? It's really difficult, and it's one of those things that I think we're really, really struggling with, in particular pastors of my generation, as we're coming up and dealing with a lot of these things, is we see a lot of what's happening, but we're either not equipped to handle it, or we don't have the right support to handle it. And so when you're the only person, again, like I'll bring it back to what I talked about before, it's exhausting. It's exhausting to do that necessary work. And if you're the only one who's putting in the work, it's like a really bad relationship. And I'm not saying that that's like, oh, that I've always been the good person in this scenario. By no means.
Trust me, I've seen your relationship.
But it's very, and I won't even pretend like nobody in churches want change, or nobody. I hear the same thing from congregation members who really have deeply wanted change and to create spaces that are more welcoming and things like that. And I've had conversations with them where they say, we're just so exhausted. We don't know what to do because we're burnt out. We've been fighting this battle for so long that we just can't anymore. And I think that's why a lot of people are leaving the church, because you can only fight so long before you give up. I mean,
Yeah, especially when the leadership in churches are supposed to be the people who are like, for all intents and purposes, almost like leading the charge. You know, for to help form the body of Christ into a body that genuinely tries its best to be free of sin and free of hypocrisy, and in a place where anyone can come and meet. Like, the leadership is supposed to be the people who are leading that charge with people. And I think a lot of, I mean, I would say it's probably safe to say that a lot of times congregation members like that who have been saying how long they've been trying to push for something like that, I can't imagine how exhausting it is when sometimes the leadership isn't really making that their goal. If anything, sometimes they push against it.
well, and for a lot of years, the history of the church was you come, you listen to preacher, you believe what preacher tells you.
You go home.
Right.
What was that noise?
You go home.
Yeah.
That was the last part.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear words. I just heard,
Yeah.
I was like, what? But I think that was the culture that was developed, was you listen to your leader.
Yeah.
And that is what you do. And so now,
Yeah, for sure.
particularly, I think that it can be hard on churches making the shift. It can be hard on leaders making the shift. And it's also really, really hard to have a leadership team where people don't agree with you.
Yeah.
It's very hard, because how do you find peace and unity in the midst of that? And that's really, 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 really difficult. But if we don't do that, I don't know that we're ever going to be able to push each other to grow, because we do
Right.
need each other to push those edges. But again, it has to be done in love. And we don't, especially after fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting, at some point you just start to, you hit a wall where you think no one's going to listen to you. So you're just like, fine, everything's off. I'm just going for it. And your intentions get shifted to basically just screaming your face off, because that's all you can do. And it's hard,
Yeah.
because I think it just gets exhausting for everyone involved. And I've said that word far too many times today, but
Sounds like you're probably pretty tired of it.
we did start Tuesday's episode by saying we were all very tired. So we're bringing it back and closing by talking about being very tired.
Full circle.
See, I brought it all back today. But no, I think it's a lot of hard work. You asked me earlier, how do we address this? And the reality is, I don't know that I have a good answer. But I know that we need to start looking at it.
Yeah.
We need to start looking at how the church is perceived, why it's being seen as hypocritical, and how do we grow and change that.
Yeah. More than just how do we clear our name,
But how
which
do
I
we
think
grow?
a lot of people can get caught up in, because it's only natural to, it's only natural to, if you feel like you're being, or you or something you're a part of is being called out for something that you believe isn't true, it's only natural for you to want to, convince everyone that it's not the case, for the sake of just wanting it to be clear, that's not who you are, let's just say. But what's more important than just clearing your name as a church is actually being the best church you can be, and not just making it seem like you're being the best church you can be. I don't know, like this it just goes beyond trying to convince everyone that we're good, and as stupid as it sounds, actually being good. Actually taking the steps to look at why people think we're one way, and to acknowledge where you fail in that and grow and be better, not just look at what people are saying about you and find the best way to, make it look like you're not that, to clear your name, but then not actually really change anything within, and not actually make your church more welcoming to new people, and to not actually hold everyone in the church and the leadership to, actually hold people accountable to make sure that, you're being good examples, and like there's always work to be done. So don't be so easy, or don't be so quick to just dismiss the public image, I suppose. Actually, the best thing you can probably do is to look at it and actually learn from it.
With that being said, we are out of time for today. Couple of reminders. This upcoming Sunday is Mother's Day. So do remember to, wish your mother a happy Mother's Day. And also recommend to her the Church is Stupid Kind of a Butt podcast.
The favorite podcast of mothers. I know. I am one.
We have a surprising number of mothers that listen to this, and they're mostly ours. With all that being said, thank you for joining us and listening in. Feel free to continue the conversation on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can find us there as well as on all the different listening platforms. For all of us here at Church is Stupid,
Come a butt.
I'm Andy.
I'm Ruth.
I'm Elijah.
And we hope that you enjoyed the rest of your week.